My presentation this evening is going to be in two parts. First, I'm going to talk about Bill 10, and after that, the second part, I'm going to talk about a recent Supreme Court of Canada decision in Loyola High School versus Quebec, which decision was rendered by the Supreme Court of Canada on the same day that Bill 10 received royal assent. Kind of an interesting coincidence. Bill 10 is a new law. It was passed on March the 10th by the Legislative Assembly. It was passed very quickly, in a matter of hours. There was some public consultation about similar bills and similar motions previously, but there was no public consultation about the actual text of Bill 10. It was rushed through in a matter of hours. It was not put to committee for amendment, which is a normal process with bills. It passes first reading and then it goes to committee and it's looked at carefully and studied, and people try to thoughtfully make recommendations to improve it, and then it's brought back. This all happened in a matter of hours on Tuesday, March 10th, 2015. The law comes into force on June 1st, 2015. So in 5 weeks' time, this will be the law of Alberta that will be in effect. What Bill 10 does is it mandates the establishment of gay-straight alliances in every school in Alberta. And when I say every school, that includes the Catholic schools, Christian schools, public schools, private schools. It even applies to homeschoolers, although on a practical level, I don't know how the bill would be enforced, but what the Act says, it applies to a school operated by a school board. So to the extent that homeschooling falls into that, this would also apply to homeschooling. The Act says that if any student requests to establish a student club that is intended to promote a welcoming, caring, respectful, and safe learning environment that respects diversity and fosters a sense of belonging, the principal of the school shall, that's where the Act shall, establish the club at the school. And if the principal is not willing to do that, the principal must immediately contact the education minister and inform the education minister that he's had a request to establish a gay-straight alliance and that he's not going to do it, whether he's unwilling or unable, doesn't matter what the reasons are. And then the minister will appoint an outsider who will be responsible for setting up and maintaining the school club. The Bill 10 refers to the outsider as, quote, responsible adult, quote. Now, there's no qualification in the legislation that this responsible adult needs to understand, let alone agree with, the mission or vision or purpose of the school. In fact, it could be, under the legislation, could be somebody who is totally hostile to what the school is all about. So there's no restrictions there. The minister can appoint whomever the minister wants to appoint if the principal refuses. Now, this applies not only to the gay-straight alliances or student clubs, it also applies to an activity that is intended to promote a respectful, safe learning environment, welcoming, respectful, safe learning environment. And that activity is not defined. So that could be hosting an outside speaker to come into the school and talk about diversity. There's no requirement, again, that that speaker understand or agree with the purpose or mission or vision of the school. It could be the raising of a rainbow flag. It could be a gay pride day. It could be whatever, an activity. The only qualification in the bill is that the activity is intended to promote a welcoming, caring, respectful, and safe learning environment that respects diversity and fosters a sense of belonging. As long as you meet that definition, this would also apply to just about any club that says that its intention is to promote that kind of a learning environment. And it's interesting, the bill itself says if a student goes to the principal to request a club or an activity, then the principal shall do such and such. Now, the word request is interesting. If I were to request of Kathy if I could have a glass of water, but if it's a request, she doesn't have to do it. But if she's compelled by law upon my request to go get me the water, it's not really a request, it's actually a demand. And that's really what the act in practice, in substance, if a student requests the club or the activity, the principal shall establish it and maintain it. So it's effectively a demand. Now, what about parents in all of this? Where are they mentioned in Bill 10? Well, they're not. They are completely and totally excluded. And the Alberta government has gone so far. I'm going to read from a short passage. This is a paper by Parents for Choice in Education. The Alberta government website has this to say about parental consent and parental knowledge. This is not in the legislation, this is on the Alberta government website. There is no requirement in Bill 10 requiring parental notification or consent for a student to participate in a gay-straight alliance. School board staff and teachers have a responsibility to act in the best interest of their students by ensuring their health and safety. School boards and teachers have a duty of care. The government expects them to act in the best interest of their students within the context of all of their legal obligations. Well, the second and third sentences are, nobody would disagree with that, but the first sentence says there's no requirement in Bill 10 requiring parental notification or consent for a student to participate in a gay-straight alliance. Now, this, of course, begs the question, what is a gay-straight alliance anyways? Anybody who spends more than 5 minutes on the internet going to various gay-straight alliance websites will see for themselves that these websites describe themselves as ideological clubs that have as a primary purpose to eradicate homophobia and heterosexism. They also have other objectives as well, to create peer support and to combat bullying and so on. But part of the purpose of the Gay-Straight Alliance is to stamp out homophobia and heterosexism. Now, the word homophobia is very interesting because typically when we talk about phobias, a phobia is an irrational fear. For example, if you live in Alberta, I don't know if there's black widow spiders in Alberta, but in most parts of Canada, there are no poisonous spiders. So if you're terrified of spiders, it's an irrational fear. Okay, in a tropical country, a fear of spiders is not a phobia. It would be quite legitimate because you could get bitten and die. Okay, but a phobia by definition is an irrational fear, fear of heights, fear of elevators, fear of escalators, fear of spiders. A phobia is an irrational fear. It has no basis in fact. So if that is what a phobia is, then homophobia, what that really should mean would be somebody who has an irrational fear of homosexuality or homosexuals. So if somebody's homophobic, that would mean that they would be terrified to attend a meeting or an event if gay people were present. That would be homophobia. But that's not how homophobia is frequently used. It is used as a term to denounce any opposition to gay marriage or to gay sex. And we see this right here in Canada in 2006. The annual Fight Against Homophobia Award, given out by a gay organization, in 2006 was awarded to the Canadian members of Parliament who voted in favor of same-sex marriage. So you don't need to be a logician or a philosopher to get the point. If you're against same-sex marriage, or if you're in favor of traditional sexual morality, then you are homophobic. And so this creates, whether we like it or not, it does create an ideological clash between religious schools in Alberta, as well as a lot of public schools where the parents might not be in favor of a gay-straight alliance. But there is a clash there between the teachings of most denominations of Christianity and Judaism, and probably all denominations of Islam, and various branches of other religions who teach that sex is sacred, or sex is holy, or sex is reserved only for marriage, or sex needs to be linked in with procreation. And that's a very different ideology from what the GSAs, who would tell the participants, if it feels good, do it, and if you want to explore your sexuality and try things out, go ahead and do that. Now, I'm not here to say whether that GSA ideology is right or wrong. I am saying there's a definite clash. It's not compatible with the teachings of most religions on morality, and in particular, sexual morality. There's more in the two papers. If you haven't taken them on the way in, take them on the way out. What the GSAs actually say about themselves. Okay, so you don't need to rely on other people to tell you. Just you spend a few minutes on the internet, you can see what they say about themselves. Now, there are a number of concerns about Bill 10 that people have raised. One of the biggest ones is that Bill 10 puts students in charge of student clubs. And I would venture to guess, and I think this is unprecedented in Alberta. I've never heard of a law that would actually put students, not to say students shouldn't be consulted. There's a difference between consulting students and kids. I think just about everybody would agree that's a good thing. You consult students, even elementary school students. You might consult them about what's going on in the school and what they like and dislike, what they might want, what they might not want. And more so at the high school level, you may consult students. But in our society, we don't give minors the right to vote. We don't give them the right to purchase alcohol, to use VLTs. There's all kinds of things, and there's a reason for that. It's an assumption that I think is one of the foundations of our legal system. That particularly with the right to vote, why do minors not have the right to vote? There's a presupposition there that when it comes to making the decisions about society, that it's the adults who decide, it's not the children. Up until Bill 10, it's been the school principal and to a large extent the teachers, in consultation with the parents and perhaps the local parent council and the local school board and the provincial government, have made decisions about education. And yes, students have been consulted, but this legislation is quite radical in that it actually puts students in charge of making the decision as to what clubs are allowed or not allowed. And I wonder if there had been a general bill that made no reference to gay-straight alliances, if that had come before the legislature, a general bill just saying we're going to pass this law and it's going to let students decide what clubs will be at their school, what clubs will be allowed. And parents will be completely excluded, and the principal cannot say no to a request, which is actually a demand. What if that had gone before the Legislative Assembly, the bill to put students in charge of student clubs? You know, it may not have gone very far, but there's a lot of emotion raised about the gay-straight alliances, and this is something, not sure if the MLAs fully thought this one through, to put students in charge of student clubs. This has an impact on parental rights because up until now, and actually for the next 5 weeks, until June 1st, parents have a say in what clubs are allowed in their school. And many would argue that that's a good thing because each school is unique, each school is different. There are some schools that are so small that they have no student clubs at all. And that's just the nature of the school. My two oldest children attend a school that has classes only on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and they get some homeschooling on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and lots of homework. The school where my two oldest children attend will probably never have any clubs because the nature of it, it's a very intense activity-packed day. The kids are busy from 8:15 to 3:40 with all kinds of stuff. They're learning all their subjects. And yet under Bill 10, a student at this school could demand to have a club or an activity, even at a school that only meets on Tuesdays and Thursdays. There are all kinds of reasons why parents might not want a particular club at their school. Some parents might not want a backcountry ski club at their school because they think it's inherently dangerous. Some parents would really object to a firearms appreciation club at their children's school, even if no firearms were used. But it's like some parents hate guns, and they would say, look, this affects the school's character, it affects the school's culture. I don't want a firearms appreciation club at my children's school, period, because of the impact that it has on the school culture, character, and environment. But the parental concerns of, it could be cultural, could be religious, could even be socioeconomic. Parents might not want a ski club, not a backcountry ski club, but like a regular ski club, because some parents at a school might say, skiing's kind of an expensive sport, and if we start up a ski club, it's going to create divisions amongst the students because some students will have parents that can afford it and others not. It's not hard to think of hundreds or thousands of examples of why parents might want or might not want a particular club at the school where their children attend. And parents might not always get their way. You could have divided opinions at a school, and the principal might make a decision that doesn't please all parents, but at least the parents do have a say, even if they don't get their way. But this is out the door with Bill 10. Parents have no say about a school club as long as the club, again, claims that it is intended to promote a safe, caring, and welcoming learning environment. Another interesting aspect of this bill, and this ties in with the point about parents deciding on school clubs, is that it centralizes decision-making in Edmonton about something that up until now has been a local decision. And there's a principle in some circles it's known as subsidiarity, in other circles it's known as decentralization, and there's a principle that for any particular situation, you get the authority closest to it that makes the decision, and you try to not have decisions imposed from on high. So a lot of decisions are made in the family, school decisions are made by the local school. Your snow removal and trash collection is not decided from Ottawa or from Edmonton, thank goodness, but it's decided here locally because there's more accountability, and a municipality is going to be better suited to making decisions about trash collection and snow removal and the fire department than to have all of that run out of Edmonton. And so what this bill does is it takes what clubs the school down the street is going to have or not, instead of that being the local school decision made by the principal, parents, teachers, and so on, it's now Edmonton has passed a law that applies to every school in Alberta. The pretext or rationale justification for Bill 10 that is often cited is that it's intended to stop bullying. Now that's interesting because the Toronto School Board a number of years ago did a comprehensive studying on bullying and what are the causes, what are the pretexts. And I think pretext is actually a better word because bullying can even take place for no reason. Some kids just get mistreated and it's not because of their race or their gender or their age. There seems to be no reason for it at all. So what the so-called excuses are for bullying is perhaps only touching the surface of the bullying problem. Having said that, the Toronto School Board in this report noted that the single biggest reason for bullying is body image, otherwise known as appearance. So if you're going to be, the single biggest reason, again, pretext, it's not a valid reason, the single biggest pretext for bullying is if you're deemed to be unattractive. Other pretexts include your grades, or in some cases the opposite, that your grades are too high, or you're too bookish, or too much of a nerd, or this or that. Religion is sometimes a pretext for bullying in some schools. And then way down at the bottom of the list, we have sexual orientation as a ground for bullying. Now, that doesn't mean that shouldn't be addressed, and it doesn't mean that it's right, but we do have to ask a question about this bill where the purpose is to prevent bullying, and there's nothing in the bill about physical appearance or your grades or you're not athletic enough or you're too athletic, all these other grounds of bullying which make up the overwhelming bulk of it. Of course, again, do we really want Edmonton to be making these decisions and creating detailed specific policies that every school in Alberta must adopt, When an inner city school in a very ethnic part of Calgary with a lot of recent immigrants is going to be very different from, say, a Hutterite school that's in rural Alberta. And for the provincial government to insist that there's a one-size-fits-all mechanism for every school in Alberta is problematic. So Bill 10, by mandating gay-straight alliances in every school in Alberta, has the effect of reducing the real diversity and choice that has been a hallmark. Up until now, Alberta's education system, even though it does leave a lot to be desired, there's always room for improvement. But we have more choice as parents than do parents in any other province. And that choice exists in part through funding, because there's partial funding for independent schools. There's some funding available for homeschooling. And, but there is a rich diversity of options to choose from. That might be more true in the larger cities than in the smaller towns. Smaller towns might have only one school. But we've got this rich diversity of different kinds of schools, and it helps parents to fulfill their responsibilities in thinking through where do you want to send your child to, as opposed to being required, as is the case in some provinces, you're required to send your kid to the school that's closest by. You have no choice at all, except maybe if you're very wealthy and you can afford a private school that gets no government funding at all. And so in other provinces, educational choice is limited only to the very wealthy, whereas in Alberta, the educational choice is available to the vast majority of people. But when every school in Alberta has a gay-straight alliance, and when every school in Alberta is legally required at the request of one student, or the demand of one student, to have a, quote, activity taking place at the school, it diminishes that diversity. It doesn't destroy it. I think under Bill 10 we still have significant diversity of schooling choices in Alberta, but by requiring every school to conform to this, we're reducing parental choice. Now, on March the 9th, so the bill was passed on March the 10th in a matter of hours. It received royal assent on March the 19th. It goes into force on June 1st. On March the 19th, on the day that Bill 10 received royal assent, on the same day, the Supreme Court of Canada came down with a decision in Loyola High School versus Quebec. And this court case concerned a mandatory Quebec government curriculum called Ethics and Religious Culture, ERC. And this was a teaching on a curriculum about culture and religion. There were a lot of parents disagreed with it. In some cases, the disagreement was that parents wanted their kids to learn about all the world religions, but didn't like the way that the curriculum started this at a very young age. And they said, look, we want our kids to learn all about Islam, Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, all of the main religions, but we don't want that being introduced to the kids when they're in kindergarten or grade 1 or grade 2. We want that taught at high school. So that was one objection. The other objection that parents had to this mandatory course was that it presented religion as being folklore. So this is kind of on par with the leprechauns and the elves and Santa Claus. And this is all part of culture, and it's interesting to study, it's interesting to learn about, but it shouldn't really be taken all that seriously. Another thing that the parents objected to was that it presented all religions as equal. And parents said, that's not what we teach at home. So there was a first court case where the Supreme Court of Canada held that the program itself was legitimate. And some parents who challenged it, they lost. And so the program is there in public schools. But this Loyola case was different. This case concerned a Catholic high school, a private Catholic high school, been around for many decades. It was in Montreal, English language, Catholic. And they applied for, they had a problem with the ERC because in the sense, they didn't disagree with the contents. Okay, this was a school, a high school, that was really big on teaching teaching world religions in its school. In fact, this school went so far as they would invite a Jewish rabbi and a Muslim imam to come in and talk about Judaism and Islam, maybe not on the same day. So this school was very open to teaching about other religions, but what they objected to was that the ERC program required them to teach about other religions and about ethics from a neutral and objective perspective, if there is such a thing. I don't think there is. But they were not allowed to teach even Catholicism. They couldn't teach Catholicism from a Catholic perspective. So under this course, when this Catholic school was teaching their Catholic students about Catholicism, they had to kind of step into this, different mindset and pretend to be neutral. And same thing about the ethics and other world religions. And the school said, like, we can't do this. Like, we are Catholic, we're a Catholic school. So when we teach about Catholicism, we actually teach it as being the truth with a capital T. And, that's our perspective. We're not forcing other people to do that, but that's what we do in our school. And so they applied to the education minister for an exemption, which was allowed under the legislation. The legislation said if you want to be exempted from ERC as a private school, you can apply for an exemption, and you have to show the minister that what you're teaching is the equivalent content. And Loyola succeeded in that. Everything that the ERC course wanted, Loyola was teaching the same contents, but from a Catholic perspective. So the minister said, no, you're not allowed an exemption. You have to teach the ERC course. The Supreme Court of Canada ruled in favor of the school, and it was a 4-3 decision, both decisions in favor of the school. The majority judgment of Justice Abella and the 4 justices said that it's a violation of religious freedom to force a Catholic school to teach Catholicism from a non-Catholic perspective, and it's not justifiable. And there's no justification for forcing the school to do that because the learning outcomes established by the Quebec course were being met by Loyola. Now, the majority did say that when discussing other religions and other ethical systems and belief systems, that Loyola needed to be, again, neutral and objective. Well, I wish Loyola all the luck in the world in trying to accomplish that. I don't know how that's possible. But that's what the majority said. The minority, the dissent, was also held in favor of Loyola School and went a bit further and said that when Loyola is teaching about other religions and about ethics, that they should be respectful, but they don't need to try to be neutral about it, which in my view is a bit more sensible than the majority decision. But we have a unanimous court ruling in favor of Loyola High School. And some of the passages, and this is from the other papers. You have one paper from the Parents of Choice in Education, another paper from the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms. This one has more of a legal constitutional focus. So the majority said, and this, I think this has relevance for Bill 10 in Alberta, the majority said, Loyola is a private religious institution created to support the collective practice of Catholicism and the transmission of the Catholic faith. And a secular state does not and cannot interfere with the beliefs or practices of a religious group unless they conflict with or harm overriding public interests. The pursuit of secular values means respecting the right to hold and manifest different religious beliefs. A secular state respects religious differences. It does not seek to extinguish them. The majority also talked about the need to respect the religious character of schools. This is interesting, the religious character, because one of the comments, was Gordon Dirks, the current education minister, who said that it doesn't matter if if a religious school, Catholic, Evangelical, Christian, Sikh, Hindu, Muslim, Jewish, it doesn't matter if they have a gay-straight alliance there, because they can teach their religious curriculum and they can hold their prayer services, and they can teach their religious doctrines. But the Supreme Court in the Loyola decision talks about religious character of schools, and most people understand that what makes a school special is the culture and the character and the learning environment. It's not just the curriculum. There's other cases as well. There's at least 2 Supreme Court of Canada authorities that I'm aware of that say that even the conduct of a teacher outside of the classroom, what the teacher does in her or his private life, personal life, impacts the culture and climate of the school. And so schools do have a right not only to teach the curriculum of their choice, but they have the right to create and maintain their own particular character and culture. The majority, another thing that has relevance to Bill 10, majority in Loyola said, an essential ingredient of the vitality of a religious community is the ability of its members to pass on their beliefs to their children, whether through instruction in the home or participation in communal institutions. And communal institutions includes the religious schools. The majority made reference to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, and so the Supreme Court of Canada said governments have to have respect for the liberty of parents to ensure the religious and moral education of their children is in conformity with their own convictions. So that was nice to hear from the Supreme Court of Canada. I'm not going to quote from the dissent because I think the majority is already good on its own. Now, the conclusion, of course, that this leads me to is to say that it certainly appears that Bill 10 is in conflict with what the Supreme Court of Canada has said in Loyola. And if there were to be a court action in the future, then the court would follow the Loyola precedent and would likely notice that Bill 10 has no exceptions, no exemptions, and that every school in Alberta is legally required to host a club or an activity that has a doctrine or a belief system or a worldview that runs at odds or may run at odds with the school. Okay, there are lots of schools in Alberta where a GSA, a Gay Straight Alliance, would be completely compatible with the school's culture. But Bill 10 doesn't respect those differences, that it could be appropriate for some schools, not for others. It's every school in Alberta that is required to have this. Now, what I would worry about is if people hearing this presentation would then shrug their shoulders and say, oh, well, it's going to go to court and it's going to get struck down, so we don't really have to worry about it. Well, that's the opposite of my message, and there are at least 3 reasons why it would not be wise for citizens to just wait for somebody else to launch a court action against this. One of them is you have very little control over who launches the court action, and if it's not the right person, and if it's not the right fact scenario, and if it's not the right issues, you could get a very bad case moving forward, and you could get the court to actually rule in favor of Bill 10 based on the wrong person bringing the wrong case at the wrong time. So, why would you leave that to, why would a citizen want to not assume their responsibilities as a citizen and wait for some anonymous other person, we don't even know who or when or where or why or how, leave it to somebody else to start a court action? That's not very wise. You don't have control. You don't have any kind of a guarantee or even necessarily a good chance of a good outcome. Another reason, this one's less important, but the court actions are expensive, And a third reason, and this one's very big, is that they take years. And while the court action is ongoing, the law will be in force, and every school in Alberta will be required to have a gay-straight alliance if one or more students demand to have one at their school. So those are three, I think, hopefully compelling reasons why, even though a court action against this could be successful and has a good chance of success, again, if it's the right person with the right fact scenario, it'd be very unwise to leave this to a court action. In contrast, when citizens take responsibility for their civic duty to be engaged in the democratic process and to talk to their MLAs, when people choose that avenue, you actually have control over what's being said and what's being pushed and what the feedback is and what's happening. Citizens have a lot more control over their MLAs than what some litigant has over what the Supreme Court of Canada might decide. So you have more control. It's not expensive to email your MLA. Sometimes I wonder if people haven't noticed, email is actually free. Well, maybe it's not, then you register for some account. But anyway, you get the point. And it's something that can be done immediately. It's not the end of an 8-year process. People can email and phone their MLAs whenever they want to. So I'm going to open it up to questions, and I'll do my best to answer. But I would say as well, if you would like to be kept abreast of the issue, this is an email sign-up sheet, Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms. I think Kathy or perhaps other people are going to circulate some, or maybe they've already been circulating. There is one on the table outside, but might as well do it during the question and answer session. We send out emails only once a month, so if you put your name and address on this, or if you want to, just put the email address. I don't even need the name. But you're not going to get bombarded by daily emails or weekly emails, but once a month you'll get an email from us. I would also like to share these with Canada Family Action and with Parents for Choice in Education. They likewise are sending out emails about once a month. So if you sign up for this, you'll be signing up for all three. If you don't like, if you only want 1 out of 3 or 2 out of 3, just unsubscribe. But I would encourage you to stay abreast of that way. So again, thank you very much for the invitation to be here with you tonight, and I look forward to your questions.